Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Jesus is a friend of mine.
Zap.
Boom.
Yeah.
Save.
Just want you guys to know.
That's a great song.
I have a friend in Jesus.
I love that YouTube video. It's one of my favorites. It's a classic.
great.
Son Seed.
Can people, I'm sure it's still out there. Just
Maybe.
YouTube it.
Maybe you'll put that as part of like one of the intro songs. You did that last week. I like that.
Oh, did you? A little Easter egg for the people who listen to the Rise and Fall of Marcel.
Yeah. So maybe we'll have another one this week.
That was nice.
Who knows?
All right, guys, I have a question.
Yes.
Ben and I were having a conversation yesterday,
Ben
and
being
I was
your
like,
husband, for those that don't know.
yes.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Not Uncle
child
Ben. Not
or-
Uncle Ben.
Not child, not
the Rice
friend.
creator.
Franklin.
He's my friend,
And Franklin.
but Ben.
Is he your person?
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
one of those people that call each other,
from
"You're my
Grey's
person"?
Anatomy? Of course. Okay, anyways. So we're having a conversation and asked this question, and I thought, hey, I'm curious what you guys think about this.
I'm excited.
So, okay, this is the question. What was the last time you did something for the first time?
Wait, the last time. Okay, I get this straight. The last time that I did something for the first time. Okay.
Yes.
But that...
Is it helpful if I give
But if it's the first time and it's
answer?
the only time,
It's the
that's
first
the
time.
last
No.
time that... Okay, I'm overthinking it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just give us an
Okay,
example.
so this was mine.
Yeah.
I had never... So this was the last time I did something for the first time. I had never been in a barber shop. Like, what? I just have never gone to a
Like you've been in a salon, but not
I
a
have
barber
never
shop.
been in a barber shop.
Okay.
And I took all three of my boys to like a actual barber to like get their hair cut, like by a barber with the little tools they use. It's art. But I had never done that before.
I'm struggling not to like be like, I don't know, what's the word?
Sassy?
Semantic-y.
Yeah.
Oh,
like,
Eric.
because I'm like, I saw Spider-Man
Oh, see,
for the
did you? That
first
would
time
count, right? If that's
for the last time.
if that's what you want to share, that's it.
I'm trying to think. Alex has something.
Yeah, I'm like, well, yeah, the semantics of it are difficult, especially when thinking on the fly. Because I'm
Well,
like,
I just love
this
how you
person's
are being
house
critical.
for the first time ever, and you know. The last time we did something for a first time, probably, and I don't know if we've ever done this. We're gonna have people over on Saturday. They text my wife, and they had a sick kid, and I was already smoking meat, which takes time. So
Sorry, I thought you were going to finish that with me.
No,
I was like,
meat.
it's really drove you to.
and so like we're like we have way too much, and so my wife is definitely more of a planner than I am. So like a last minute invite to someone is kind of, you know, are you going to get rejected? What if they say no?
you open yourself up.
Who do
for-
we invite? And
Well, it wasn't us, was it, Eric?
And
No, it wasn't.
It was actually a podcast listener and their family, but so
That's nice.
We had been meaning to have this couple over for a while, or wanting to, but I mean, just with sickness and kids and
Yeah.
all that, it's difficult. So we're just like, let's just shoot them a random invite today and see if they'll come on over, and they did, and yeah, it was a good time.
And that was the first time you've ever-
I think it's like the first time we've had like a spontaneous, like that day. Let's just invite these people on over.
Once we
Nice.
start a Patreon, that'll be one of the tiers. You'll get an invite from Alex
Yes.
if you're a listener for
party.
smoked meat
Yes.
in West Omaha.
And I think it was pretty good, by the way. So Jess, Eric, thank you for stopping over. Actually, that's funny because that's their names.
Oh, really? I thought you were being
couple's name-
sarcastic.
No, the couple's names literally are Jess and Eric.
Yeah, we're not a couple, and that's not us. But
No,
I
let's just
never put
dispel
those two
that.
together until right now. So that's awesome.
yeah,
We
that's
should have them on the podcast sometime.
okay, that'll be confusing. Yeah, the last time I did something for the first time. Ooh, I don't know. I just feel like I could just name a lot of
Have
random
you tried
things.
a new food recently?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, I just don't know. I think there's just random things that I do.
You're
and
probably
like I
making
watched
small
a TV
discoveries.
show
Yes,
for the
every
first
day.
time, and I
I think of your husband though when I think of this answer, and because you guys were caretakers. For those that don't know, there's an apartment actually in our building
There
that
is.
someone lives in, and you guys did that when
We did
when
for
Ben was
3
an
years.
intern here, and after that. But wasn't one of his goals to like defecate in every toilet in the building? trash. So he did that for the first time.
I don't know if he ever said the word defecate, but it might. I think so. I could text him.
It was either him
was
or another caretaker.
To poop in every toilet.
Every toilet, yeah.
Could be.
And there's a lot of them.
There's quite a few. I think there's like, I don't know how many toilets because it wasn't me.
Yeah, so Ben, clear that up for us if you could.
Oh, he's going to love you for that
Yeah,
one.
thank you.
You're going to get a personal.
Personal
like-
text. I better get one.
We're like stealing from the Holy Post podcast with this like news of the butt segment
Yeah.
happening right now.
Let's have a guess.
And we're talking about
Guess
Ben's
how many
butt.
toilets Ben pooped in. If you're listening to this right now, we would love for you to submit that on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're listening. Send us an email, podcast@cccomaha.
I don't know if this has ever gone off the rails this much. This is great.
I
it's
don't know, but I
definitely
think I
not
should
the
ask a
rails
question every week. So
Wow.
Potential
Well,
spam
I got one.
calling me.
This is the first time that this topic has ever come up on the podcast for me.
Perfect.
And hopefully it's the last time.
I was going to answer this potential spam live on the podcast. Someone trying to sell me probably car insurance, but we won't do it.
Oh, don't do that.
Hey, how are you? You're live on our podcast right now.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
So, speaking of these sorts of things, like this, we get feedback from time to time from our listeners, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot now about toilets. That's exciting. But a couple listeners, Eric is one of them, and this isn't me. I promise I don't email the podcast just to keep the inbox full. But wrote in a nice encouraging note that it's always appreciated.
it is. It's so appreciative. Appreciated.
Should we read a little of it or not?
I don't
Do you want me
know.
to keep it
I think
I think it
anonymous?
was
Yeah.
kind of just for us.
Yeah,
Just-
but
okay.
it is encouraging because, I mean, I think and we've said this, but we're broadcasting
Yeah.
to people. We know analytics. We know all of those things. But when you don't hear feedback, it's nice to know that, someone in his case is hearing this. It's challenging him.
Yeah, that's kind of the long and short of
Yeah.
it. Is it's encouraging him to think critically about some of the topics that he might not have otherwise.
Yeah.
So-
So that,
I think
that is
you wonder
encouraging.
too, because it's like we every week are putting feelings, emotions. It's not like we just come here cold and just share off the rails, like what we think about something. Like it's very deep and personal stuff that we're sharing. So it's always like, okay, was that vulnerability helpful or
yeah.
what? So it's always appreciated.
Yeah, and that was one of two, and then also Russ sent in an email, and his was much longer, so we're not going to be able to get into all of it. But it was like some really, in a lot of ways, it was constructive criticism about a couple of the last episodes that we've gone over. The cryptocurrency metaverse one and the Mars Hill. But it's one of those things where it's helpful for us sometimes to kind of reflect on what's said and maybe how it's heard or the way that we frame certain topics. Because I think even for me, that's been like one of the biggest struggles, even launching this podcast, is just how do we represent our thoughts in a really understandable way and represent ourselves well. And I mean, sometimes I think we just miss the mark. And then when you hear people's comments, you go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that's necessarily how I was being heard."
Yeah, but it gives you the opportunity to respond and know when. Man, the worst thing ever, I think, for me sometimes is like way down the line finding out a perception wasn't real and not being able to have those conversations and say, hey, I've had multiple of those via email this week just around mask mandates and all those kinds of things online. Just as the online pastor, a lot of those things get sent into me or Eric. You see them when they come through our website. And so even though it's been challenging, I always appreciate people that are willing to have nuanced conversation back. Yeah. And it does build some trust. And yeah, it's just great to see people that are willing to send information, ask questions, and not just be critical, but have nuanced dialogue. And so I'm grateful for that.
I do appreciate how people engage, because I feel like we do oftentimes live up to our name, the Uncomfortable Podcast. And so sometimes I mean, I even thought that with with Russ's email, it's like, okay, I'm glad we're not the only ones that are like uncomfortable and wrestling with it. And then I kind of love the beauty of what we do, because it's not like we wrap each topic up in a bow and like put it on YouTube and we're like, this is it. This is all the answers. I love that people like in the comments or the feedback that we get are wrestling, and they kind of like even take things that we start with and wrestle with them further.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of the points and why we're doing what we're doing is so that we can engage and people can engage and think deeper about stuff. So
Yeah, and this is just a pause in the middle of a day where a lot of other things are happening, and you've got to just kind of sometimes close out, some of the other things happening in life and not drag it into here. And so sometimes it gets drug in, and so grateful for feedback nonetheless. So.
Yes, indeed. And so today's episode, later on, we're going to be talking about spiritual abuse. So I'm sure we'll, we'll fumble a little bit here and there, but it's, again, another important topic that kind of plays into some of the past things that we've talked about. But before we get to that, we have headlines.
Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus.
Our first and only headline today comes from WashingtonPost.com. It says an Oklahoma pastor has apologized after smearing his spit in a man's eye during a sermon. Quote, "It got too live," is what he said in his apology. Now, Jess has already warned me that this is triggering.
So
I would
why
like
there's only one headline. I can only handle one.
so I'd like to go ahead and warn everyone else that
if you have a gag reflex of any kind,
that sort of thing kind of bothers you, maybe skip ahead. Pastor Michael Todd spit in his hand and cupped it for 2 minutes as he continued to preach. And to be clear, I watched the video. He spit 2 times in his hand, making don't make the sound effects. But yes, he did the kind of the hockaloogie sound as he did this. Oh no, Jess is starting to...
We're going to have a first time here, puking on the podcast.
The first time.
Oh my gosh.
The last time he did something for the first time. Anyways, Michael Todd's kind of become one of the,
that's gross.
Celebrity pastors, I guess. One of the kind of with the B level, C level celebrity pastors.
Transformation Church. I mean, it's a huge mega church in Tulsa.
Yeah, it's been growing.
Doing a lot of cool things online, honestly. So.
Yeah. We, you kind of watch it from afar, and I guess he was. You hear him explain it and like what he's trying to say, and you go, okay, I can grasp where the heart is of this, but oh man, in a time of a global pandemic, when you're up there spitting in your hand, and he doesn't just like lightly put this in the guy's face, but he rubs it in like he's like massaging lotion into his skin, almost like it's really dramatic. It's just
nice shimmer on the camera. You could see.
It's just Jess is gonna lose it.
I am gonna throw up.
Okay, well, we'll stop talking about the spit. But I don't know, Alex. I mean, you have some experience in the pulpit.
I do.
When you're talking about Jesus healing the blind, does it get messy, as he says in his example, his illustration?
I mean, he is a pastor that I think has garnered a reputation for being pretty shock and awe.
I was going to say hands-on.
Hands-on, yes, in that way. And he was telling a story, one of Jesus' miracles. He spit in the mud and, and then mixed it up and put it on a blind guy's eyes, and the guy was able to see. It's a biblical story. Actually, there's a couple narratives that talk about this, and there are definitely things, especially in my youth ministry days, that probably wouldn't fly as far as if I tried them. And honestly, I'm curious. I don't know if they do multiple services. I'm guessing if they do, it did not happen in the second service. But what was interesting was this isn't the first time that he's done this. And so I'm kind of like, the first time was not in the middle of a global pandemic, mind you. I think it was nasty either way. But I think that's what's caused more of the uproar this time is this was this past Sunday.
Okay, I couldn't get through all the articles, so why was he doing this?
An illustration.
Oh, just an illustration. It wasn't like a blind or someone that
it wasn't like a healing method. No. But he was trying to talk about how I think sometimes like our miracle, it's not comfortable. You have to.
Here's a quote. It says, God's saying, can you physically and spiritually and emotionally stand when getting the vision or receiving it might be nasty?
Yeah.
So he's saying that sometimes when God works, it's nasty. And you got to be okay with
All
it.
right. Well,
yeah, so it's one of those things. Hopefully, I mean, he has since apologized, which is, what else are you going to do in that? I mean, I guess you could double down on it, but it seems like a humble apology. I don't know the relationship to the gentleman that he did that to. I think it was the same guy both times. So I think it's maybe a brother.
What kind of arrangement is
like
that? Like, okay, we're going to do the spit illustration again.
is he an intern?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
man, it's a strange.
And you can even
thing.
hear like in the video, like some like he knew what he was doing. I mean, as far as getting shock and awe, like he definitely.
People were groaning a lot,
and that's the difficult part when you're always trying to like. Where's that line? When that's kind of your style and you're kind of known for that, you're always trying to push the envelope, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so...
and I guess if he got away with it or it worked one time.
Yeah. So he said he's recently... I mean, he said it's disgusting. He crossed the line. He said he's passionate about giving people hope. And so much so that he does extreme things sometimes just to help people see that. And obviously more people probably for a bad reason right now have heard about his ministry and things like that than they have in a long time. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, we probably spent enough time on that.
And there is
topic.
a video, but pass on that.
Does this classify as spiritual abuse?
Maybe.
I would say that is something I would put in the camp. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that is what we're going to be talking about up next. Spiritual abuse. That's a term that's, I feel like we've heard it somewhat in the past, but it really just in the past couple of years has it really taken a forefront of, I guess, the Christian community. I think most people are familiar with mental abuse or
emotional,
physical abuse. But spiritual abuse is one of those things that has, probably been around for a very, very long time, but we just have never really put a name on it. How would we define it? I guess as a collective here, what's a good definition?
So I think that if you Googled definition of spiritual abuse, you're going to find a couple different ones. The one that we're choosing to use today is by Dr. David Ward. He's a counselor. There's a couple leading psychologists that have defined this, and this says this: spiritual abuse is a misuse of power in a spiritual context whereby spiritual authority is distorted to the detriment of those under its leadership. It influences one's inner and outer worlds and has the potential to affect the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual domains of the individual.
Yeah, that sums it up really well.
Yeah.
And I think the best way for us to kind of start into this topic is to not only define it, but maybe explain the ways to spot it. Like, what are some warning signs? What does it potentially look like, to maybe just help people understand, like, this seems kind of hard to grasp.
And I think most of them are fear-based. And I think a lot of abuse, whether it's spiritual, physical, mental, fear is probably somewhere within the grasp, because you're trying to control somebody or a narrative and things like that. And so I think using fear tactics to manipulate people. So if someone's using fear tactics like, publicly shaming or things like that, not only just to manipulate you, but if I was, having a conversation, you did something wrong, Eric, and I wanted to make an example of you on the podcast and like, don't ever do what Eric just did. Yeah. That would not just be, manipulating you, but it'd be manipulating maybe Jess to be like, oh, if I ever say something like that, because Alex has some kind of authority. Yeah. There's that. I think punishing people who disobey or disagree with your opinions. And so if you're a leader and, anytime somebody disagrees with you, you're just dismissive, you punish them essentially. And it's not always like you're bad, you lose your job, but sometimes it's punishing relationally, like you're isolating them or taking them away from you, or just creating a culture where if you question me, I'm God's man or I'm God's woman. Questions are not, allowed. It's the "I told you so" kind of thing in a church. I think twisting scripture, Hebrews 13, it does talk about how we are supposed to honor, in a lot of places, but Hebrews 13:7 talks about how we're supposed to honor those who God's put in authority over us, and how, they're responsible in some ways for our soul. And so twisting scripture to highlight, which is kind of interesting because Hebrews talks about a priesthood of all believers, which is kind of a departure from the priesthood that was happening in the Old Testament. And so sometimes we over-elevate our authority and twist scripture to give somebody some more supremacy, like they're closer to God or something. I think another way, using desire for a relationship to manipulate people. So I think this can happen in a setting where like somebody wants to have a relationship with you because of, your stature or your leadership, and you kind of use that to control them, and manipulate them. Hey, well, yeah, if you're just not gonna agree with me, or you're gonna go this way or that way, then you're replaceable. So a lot of times it comes with those kind of your replaceable feelings. If you don't want to fall in line, we talked about last week, Mark Driscoll. It was like, hey, get on the bus or get run over. It's those kinds of things. I think also unhealthy desire to control another person's life or outcomes. And so if you're wanting to control somebody's life or outcomes, and I think there's a difference in like, man, I really want what's best for somebody. I want them to meet Jesus and have their life redeemed. But then when I take steps to try to control that or control the narrative or push that, or in every outcome is about getting what I want, what I think is best. And I think those are some of the ways to begin to spot, hey, spiritual abuse is happening, all around me. And I
think for as many as you just listed, I could probably list another like to equal the amount that you did. And I think it's just like important to note that like, as we go into this conversation, this is such a broad conversation. It's probably a new conversation that a lot of people are having. And so we're not going to be able to hit the mark. And so we don't want people to feel like we missed you or we're not seeing you. Also just acknowledging that spiritual abuse does not just come from the pastor leader of a church. I could be spiritually abusive to somebody. And so the things that you're saying, like we easily could be at fault at that. So it's on a church level, it's in homes. And also just as a counselor, the abuse we're talking about also, like you can't necessarily be diagnosed with spiritual abuse. It falls under psychological abuse. So it falls under, because it's right up with emotional and verbal abuse. So they all kind of go in together. So it's an interesting thing to research and to kind of give some words to.
Well, let's talk about some examples then that we've maybe seen in Christian culture, and then we can kind of move into maybe even some personal examples, what that looks like. I mean, obviously, coming out of last week's episode with the rise and fall of Mars Hill, I think stuff we talked about last week with Mark Driscoll, and there was a lot of good examples there, so we don't probably need to rehash that. I mean, another episode that we've done in the past with Mark Ashton, we talked about Ravi Zacharias and some of the things that came to light after he passed.
And we talked about that even with the president of our denomination, John,
that's true.
Dr. Stumbo, too, just to get his kind of insight on maybe how some of that stuff was happening as well. So
there are those are some prominent examples that we've probably covered enough in past episodes. I think one that was very prominent for a while in headlines was the Catholic Church with the sexual abuse and pedophilia that was going on. That was also, I mean, that's a physical abuse, but that was also, I mean, the spiritual abuse that goes along with someone who's the spiritual leader manipulating you into those situations. I think an example that I'm very familiar with just growing up and watching televangelists on TV, but the way that they manipulate you for money because you can be healed, or you can have this, or you can become rich, or you can do what and that, I think that takes on a form of spiritual abuse where they're using your faith and your desire to follow Christ in a way that's manipulative and gains them wealth. Are there any other examples that come to mind?
I mean, I think it's been happening in church history, throughout, whether it was indulgences being sold, by churches in order to basically help for penance of sin, and so like you could actually pay to have that, or pay to have forgiveness for maybe a family member that died, and you're like, I don't know if they went to heaven, and they're somewhere in purgatory, and so you could pay. The church kind of set that up as a way to do that. I think specific things. I think sometimes some of our some like baptism or communion or some of those things sometimes can be held in regard and used in a manipulative way that only a certain person. And they should be respected and reverenced and revered. I think there's a good, healthy, but then sometimes it gets into only this person has the authority, the ability to offer those things, and that they have, some kind of secret connection or ability with God. And so I think throughout church history, it's been happening in different forms and created, some acceptability of that for sure. I don't know about you, Jess, if you have anything to add.
I'm just like, as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about just how we've brought up like Mark Driscoll, Ravi. We even have had the episode like when leaders fall, and we've talked about failure porn and just why there's this fascination with this. This is obviously like a huge issue, but I think that the why we tend to bring those things up is just because there's so many different lessons to be learned when something fails in a huge way. And so we've brought these guys up a couple times, and it's like it's so connected, and I feel like it's hard to unravel and like process through it. But I also think one of the ways that there's spiritual abuse is like when someone comes to you and says like, hey, this is happening in my home, or hey, my husband's doing this, or my wife's doing this, or like, what do I do? And when the answer is you be better, or you change this, or do this, or if you were different, it comes in so many different ways. And I think that's why, we can be confused, or maybe we don't realize it's happening until it's happened. Or it's been happening for a while.
And I think another example that comes to mind for me, even personal experiences I've had, is an invalidation of your own beliefs or convictions or opinions, even where those become invalidated because maybe it's someone who is your elder or whatever. They can kind of use that. Well, yeah, but God has shown me the truth about this, and so that's why you're wrong. And I think that's like a very like interpersonal way that can take place sometimes. We don't have, I guess maybe Alex, you can correct me, because I was thinking we don't have like Carl here to tell me I'm wrong, but I've always kind of thought of the third commandment, which is, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. I've always kind of thought of that in a way of, it kind of helps, I guess, it's kind of teaching against spiritual abuse in some ways in my mind, because it's demonstrating that, a lot of times when I was growing up, it was just, don't say God's name in vain. Like, don't use his name as a curse word. But I think so many times it gets overused, and maybe it shouldn't be used that much at all by Christians, but this idea of God told me this. And I think how that is so many times is using God's name in vain, and I'll hear that and I'm go, that's just kind of a red flag for me sometimes when people are like, well, God told me this, and I don't know if we always apply the third commandment to that, but I feel like it's very relevant in that conversation of spiritual abuse, because how do you can't argue with that. You can't win, especially if it's a leader in your life who's telling you that God gave them a message for you. Like you can't win. And if that doesn't align with what you have going on, and even in a respectful way, like how do you go against that? You're kind of trapped.
Yeah, those words, God said, God told me so, are some of the most wielded dangerously. I would say that's if not a red flag coming from someone, a yellow flag to at least examine and process, especially if there's zero willingness to like, who else, or where is that in scripture that doesn't line up with the character of God, or, those types of things, because I do think that God does speak, and we've talked about this in sermons, and we just did a whole series at the church, and I even got to preach on God speaking, but I think God does affirm. He uses community, he uses scripture, he uses the Holy Spirit as affirmations for the way he does, speak, the way that God does speak to us. And so, I mean, the God card, man, it just, dating, people are, the God card comes out. It's not you, it's me, but it's not really me, it's God. And
or God told me to marry you, which is abuse in a way.
And the blame game has happened since Genesis 3. It was, the woman was like, well, I mean, the man was like, it's the woman's fault. The woman you gave me, she made me do it. And then the woman's like, no, he made me do it. The serpent made me. And so there's just this constant cyclical thing of trying to blame others that I think becomes a part of this conversation. It's not directly tied into it, but I think it becomes a part of the humanity and our depravity.
I think there's like certain times too when I think it's like when someone's learning something, someone's new or someone's young, there's like certain times where people are more vulnerable too. And so things like you didn't get this because you didn't do enough for God, or you didn't have enough faith, or Jesus is mad at you because you did this, or how we choose to use our words, or how beliefs are put onto something. It just think about how that can, and how someone can interpret that, and it can change the way that they think or perceive things years later. I mean, if we think about like spiritual abuse, you could recall something from maybe last week, or maybe it's from you were 10 years old, and just how much those, especially when it's a spiritual, a meaningful thing, can just be imprinted on who we are and how we see the world. And then it's like how we see our Heavenly Father.
Well, and when it's things that are concerning our faith, it's such an infinite scale that it can impact our worldview. It can impact our decisions on a daily basis. It can impact our relationships, and so to have someone manipulate your faith for their benefit, or just to have control over you, or whatever it may be, that it can be really hurtful. And I think a part of it we have to be careful about throwing the word abuse around in general, right? And I think for me, my gut reaction sometimes to a culture, like a Me Too culture and all this different things, where we're starting to be more and more aware, hypersensitive to different types of abuse. I think initially, maybe it's the way I was raised or whatever, it's just kind of this, oh, well, just man up, whatever, man up, buttercup kind of thing. And I kind of have that reaction. So when I hear these stories come out, I tend to kind of brush it off as, that's an exaggeration, or they didn't have to listen to that person, or whatever. You can kind of justify it. But then it's like, then as I kind of recount different times in my past where things have been said to me, and I have modified my behavior or changed the outcome of maybe even the decisions I made in my life because of something that someone said to me that really wasn't God's intent for my life. It's just that I was trying to please this person who was telling me what God wanted for me, and then it's like, okay, yeah, that really does feel like abuse on the flip side of it, and it's like, and I just want to preface that because I feel like sometimes people who are listening to this, who maybe are on the fence of these types of terms and things like that, like, yeah, you don't have to just go out on a witch hunt and be saying everyone is abusing everyone. But I do think it is important to be aware of it and notice those red or even yellow flags, as you mentioned. Are there places where that maybe we can define what isn't spiritual abuse. And I think you started to head down that path, Jess, where it's like people maybe are young in the faith, or maybe it's a young leader and they have good intentions and they're trying to lead people well, but they're missing the mark. So maybe don't jump to conclusions that they're abusing me, but they, like all of us, just need to get better on the path. Sorry, I said a lot
You're
there.
going to say something.
Well, I thought you were asking Jess specifically,
Oh.
so I was like,
I didn't know if you had more to add. I just kind of mentioned it, that's something that
You're
she
saying
brought up.
what isn't? I think that is where
Is it a fine
that's
line?
kind
Is
of
that-
where we
yeah.
have to sit a little bit, because I think there is a tendency for us to say this is everything that it is, so valid. These are valid experiences, but there's also the tendency to write off, like I'm thinking of just what does accountability look like?
Yeah.
What does, me as a leader, or like even like in a family, like how do I correct you
Yeah.
in a loving way?
Especially when there's signs of self-destructive tendencies or things that you can point to that are obviously harmful for that person to be doing, but in a society where kind of you do you type of a culture where whatever decision you make is the best for you because it's centered around you. It would be easy for people to argue and go, well, everything you're telling me right now is you're abusing me because you're trying to speak into my life, but all this is abuse.
yeah, and there's definitely a scale. I mean, we had way back, maybe episode 5 or something like that, Dave came in and he talked about being in a cult, and a religious cult. And so there's like that way far extreme of like someone's claiming to be a prophet and all of that, and you're living in a commune and some just more wild extreme stuff, that oftentimes we don't think of. But then I think where it can get tricky is when we use words that are biblical, like submission or sacrifice. And so there's a biblical call towards submission. There's a biblical call towards sacrifice. We actually see Jesus model these in his life. We see him model this and ask for it from his disciples. But then how we define those things sometimes can or how we let people around us define what sacrifice and submission looks like can sometimes muddy the water and make us feel maybe like if someone ever says, hey, you need to submit to authority, that's true, that's biblical. There is a reason to submit to authority, but that very much can that's one of those things that can teeter-totter pretty easily with a wrong definition or a wrong use of that word or that vernacular to a pretty messy kind of thing. And so I think those are things, because we love honor, like we love honor more than humility. But then we see in Philippians 2, Jesus's path was a path of submission, not even just considering equality with God something to be grasped, but he took on the form of a servant. And so words like servant, especially when we have the history, slavery, being a slave, to Christ, we've got a lot of baggage with those words.
We do.
And it can get messy, but there is a biblical call and mandate. And so I think using those with wisdom and making sure we explain well what that is, or ask questions. Hey, when you use submit or when you use slave to Christ, what do you mean? Because we do have to know that there's baggage that comes with those.
And I think what is spiritual abuse not? It's someone that is willing to answer that question. I would say somebody that's like
Submitting to submitting and sacrificing
somebody
as
that's,
well.
Yeah, right. That's serving. I think somebody that is not consistently isolating. I think somebody that gives you credit for what you're saying and like hears you out, or like even gives you credit in a more public way. I mean, just ways where it's not like it's just you and that person, or you in this like isolated area where you don't know like what the message is, and that person not being opened up to other people. I think like even when other people are involved, like I think about just conversations I've had like in the past couple years of just even things I've been struggling with spiritually, and just being around people that to me I saw like that are spiritual leaders that were able to speak into my life, but it was in a way where it was like, okay, now do you have anything to say? Like, what do you think about that? Not just like, this is it, boom. But I think it's so different. That's why it's like we kind of have to be.
I think it's equally, at least, if you're the person who is feeling like you're being spiritually abused, you need to be able to speak that out and tell people about it. But I think in a way that is respectful and God honoring and not accusatory and not hateful and not, villainizing the person immediately, but get to know their story.
Get to know the person's story making you feel that way.
Right. I think because we hear so many stories, I think especially now in a time of where faith deconstruction is so big, and a lot of people blame their parents for raising them in a certain type of household, whatever faith that might be, and a lot of times it comes off so hateful, like, well, how could you have done this to me? You messed me up and whatever. And so I think as the person who is feeling as you're abused, I just think you have to kind of approach these situations respectfully and try to understand why this person maybe put you in this position that you're feeling this. And then I think vice versa, when a person is hearing this or you're being told that maybe you are the abuser, it's like, humble yourself and go, okay, let me hear this out before you just react. Because I think it's easy to go, no, I'm just listening to God and you're off base. But how do you find that common ground? I don't really have the answer.
Well, right.
To that.
And we're sitting here looking at this as three, hopefully, like, we're healthy, we're growing people. But there are some people where it's like, it's obvious abuse and you scream and you run and you get as far away as you can as possible, or you don't go in to it alone, or you don't confront somebody unless you have, processed it. I mean, I know I bring up counseling all the time. It's like such an incredible tool to use, but just even like spending time like processing how you've been hurt. I mean,
yeah. And I think help me understand. I mean, ability to have relationships where you ask difficult questions, where you're able to. We even had a gentleman come today to talk to our staff about just having, I don't know the phrase he used, but just both people being able to have conversations above the table that they can actually dialogue a little bit more and both bring humility to the table, set an umbrella of grace up, that, hey, this isn't personal. Maybe it's how you're doing something and it feels like this, and we all bring our own experiences into the table. But I think a lot of times most people don't like go searching for these situations to become victims of it. A lot of times you walk into a situation thinking it's your way out or it's a better situation. Eric and I were even talking to a friend in ministry that last week that thought they were landing like a dream job type of opportunity, but then it took a while of, okay, they really did a good job of selling this place, this position to me. But then as I talked to people and I approached other people and I asked more questions, it seemed like there weren't any willingness to respond. There was no humility. It was all those things. And so then they were able to recognize, that they're in that. But Stockholm syndrome is real when it comes to this kind of stuff, where you can get into this situation and become a slave. And when your eternity is tied to this, right?
Yeah.
When your standing with God is tied to this, man, it can drive a whole lot of fear and anxiety for a person, and availability if you're emotionally immature to be a victim of abuse. And a lot of times these people are able to find and prey on people that are in those types of situations, unfortunately. And that's the painful part is that a lot of times the people that do suffer from abuse, maybe it's been a pattern in their life, or they don't have self-confidence. That's why our identity and self-confidence, all of those things are knowing who we are in Christ, are very important to helping us have tools to battle against this, I think, as well.
Are there any other ways that we'd recommend respectfully confronting these situations? Or did we cover it all?
Well, I just liked what you said, and I didn't mean to cut you off earlier if I did,
No,
just
that's
about I think asking the question and as I'm thinking about what you were saying, it's like, it's almost, if you can safely do it, to process that and then to be willing to have the conversation and maybe not just maybe make a long post or however you want to, I want to be careful because I feel like we all confront differently and we all kind of, we're different people. So it's like we achieve how we process and like how we deal with things a little different. But it's like being in a situation where it's like, I want to go back and like, they said this on Sunday, or they said this in the hall, or so-and-so said this, like, I want to have that constructive conversation. I hear what you're saying versus just like letting loose.
Well, and I think there's an important defining factor there too, with some of these examples, like the Ravi Zacharias or even some of the Catholic Church stuff. Like there are forms of spiritual abuse that are leading into a physical abuse, and by all means, if that is happening, like you said, just run. There's no room to sit there and negotiate this or talk about what's right and what's wrong. Like there are situations where yes, it is okay for you to not even engage. You know what I mean? But I think when there are these long-term hurts that have maybe been happening over time, or it's a leader in your family, or it's a leader in your church or something like that, where it's maybe not as obvious and you're able to have those conversations. That's kind of, I think, what I was getting at.
That's really
and I would just encourage people, we don't have time to get into all of it today, but Jesus has some pretty big thoughts about this, and he talks to the Pharisees, the religious people. Usually the people that Jesus gets the most mad at are some of the people that were in authority inside of a church. Matthew 23 is one of the spots that he really lays into these people that have their own self-interest, that are supposed to be people that are bringing God's kingdom, but they really have reversed it. And a lot of them have not done this, and they have self-interest in mind, but they've just seen it modeled as well. And so, there's some people I've just seen modeled in poor church environments, and that's just what they know. And so I think that's another thing. So I'd read Matthew 23 and just see what Jesus has to say to some of the religious elite people. Study that, process that, because I have to do that. Even in my own life, because I can, I crave power, I crave authority, like I crave climbing the ladder. And so this keeps me humble too, to say, man, I just don't want to put myself in that position, but I don't just not put myself in that position by osmosis. Like I have to sacrifice, I have to kill my flesh daily. I have to, in a metaphorical sense, but I have to sacrifice, I have to choose humility. Like none of those things are natural. And so I have to choose to put on the fruit of the Spirit every day and to invite the Spirit to be informing that in my life. Otherwise, man, I'm going to just drift that way as a leader. And I have at different times just drifted that way and been lucky enough to have people that have caught me and had difficult conversations with me and brought those things up as well. So it's a tough thing, especially I'm glad that we don't lead alone, and that there are people and systems. I mean, Christ Community is not a perfect church. I've seen leaders fall. My direct, we've talked about that before. And so we're not painting us as this perfect place, but we do have mechanisms in place that are, and their systems are going to fail at some point. They're going to break down, but at least building some of those systems, accountability, governing boards, elders, processes are helpful things. And so if you're in a place that has none of those, then it's probably a place ripe, even if it's began with good intentions, it's probably a place that's ripe for abuse to happen.
Well, I mean, as we continue to talk here a little bit about safeguarding ourselves from abusing others in this way, I think your community is such an important part of that, because I think so many times the experiences that I've had, it comes from people who have isolated themselves. And when you get alone with your own thoughts and you start to believe certain things about yourself, about your relationship with God, and you're not having any checks and balances with others to go, yeah, that's good, or whoa, where's that thought coming from, or why are you thinking that way, or why are you making decisions based on this emotion? Sometimes you can start to just believe that you're the ruler of your own kingdom. And then when you interact with others, it's very difficult for you to have a nuanced conversation, because you have so much confirmation bias within you that your way is the right way, that what is above all. And it just leads to abuse almost naturally, and you might not even realize that's what's occurring. But it's really important to be in community with others, to have others coaching you, that you're accountable to, mentors, things like that.
I think another thing is I just love that you brought up the fruit of the Spirit, because I think it's looking at somebody, are they producing the fruits of the Spirit? And then am I? I think that's the way that we safeguard, is like, how are those things being produced in my life? Because it's like, if those things are the bigger things, like it will suffocate other things. As you're growing and as you're spending time with the Father daily, there are things that are either going to be brought to the light and dealt with, or they're not going to be able to survive. So I think that that's like an excellent thing. I love that you brought that up, Alex. And I think the other thing is, you were talking, Eric, it's like being in community, but not living in an echo chamber. Like one of the things I love about the people in my life is that they're different, and they come from different ethnicities, walks of life, beliefs as me. And so I'm hearing different messages, and I'm being called out in different ways, and I'm growing and I'm learning from different people. And I think when we surround ourselves with the same people, hey, that can be great, but they also are going to reiterate maybe our positive and negative things that we're thinking. And so who am I surrounding myself by? Who am I being influenced by? What's my news feed? Is it just, one person? Am I blocking out other people? I think that those are little ways that, whether we're perpetuating any kind of spiritual, emotional, any kind of abuse, I think it's just a good practice anyways, is to
Well, and you see different. I think in like smaller communities too, you'll see examples of ministers or other Christian leaders who kind of get fast tracked into leadership, and they haven't really had a chance to have those moments of mentorship that lead to good leadership. And I mean, I think this is like not about that specifically, but like growing up being kind of a sheltered South Dakota boy, I don't know why, I'd never heard the word karaoke pronounced out loud. I'd only read the word. And for the longest time, I thought the word was pronounced karaoke. And I would say karaoke like a crazy person, and no one corrected me. I had other people in my family who said it the same way, because whatever, you just don't know. I know when I started dating my wife, we were driving by a place and I was like, oh, they got karaoke there. And she looked at me and she's like, what did you just say? And I was like, she's like, it's karaoke. What? Like, I had no idea, and it's just one of those small examples where when we isolate ourselves and we think we have all the answers, and then we just keep finding those answers by whether it's a Google search or whatever, or going to scripture even and saying, oh, well, this, I can twist this to align with what I think. That's only going to lead you down a road that can lead to you hurting others without realizing it, because you're trying to force them to fit into this thing that you believe in your worldview.
And that's why I think even on the podcast, that's why we are intentionally not trying to ever just lob bombs at people or try to position ourselves as authoritative on something, to share. And that's why we bring in guests, and we value other thoughts and opinions and experts and people that have been, doing life longer than us, or people that are younger than us that have different experiences because of where we live. And so one of our values is not to be ammunition, in somebody's weapon or tool of arsenal to be able to fire at somebody. And that makes people mad sometimes, because we crave that. That's what strong leadership is. Take a stand. But man, in so many ways, those conversations go a lot more healthily when I get to know somebody and we're having those conversations. And so hopefully we're helping people think, but also not telling people how to think.
And I don't think our faith, I mean, the word faith doesn't mean that you know what's going to happen, or you have faith that something might happen. And I just think so many times as Christians, we'll in a world where we'll see like our faith attacked or our beliefs attacked and things like that. We want to have all the answers. We want to be able to tell people we know it all and we're right. But man, if there isn't beauty in the mystery of this God who created the galaxy, and it's like if we can't embrace that mystery and go, you know what, maybe I don't have the answers. Maybe this person that I'm trying to help, I don't have the answers for them, and maybe we can seek that out through someone else. There's always so much nuance, so much mystery in this world and in our faith that we have to be able to embrace that equally as knowing our Father and believing and trusting in Him. So I guess I would just encourage people to not go, okay, well, you need to just tell it, like Alex said, you just need to tell them how it is, because sometimes that's not how it is. And that's the paradox of it. And I've always said, God doesn't struggle with paradox. Humans, we struggle with paradox a lot. God does not.
Mm-hmm.
Put that on a bumper sticker.
There you go. It's on my bumper sticker. I got it already. It's on my Honda. All right, everyone. Thank you. This has been a great conversation. I think we could go on and on, but I think we found a place to land it. Thanks, Alex and Jess, for having this conversation. Thanks for everyone for listening. We really appreciate your listenership. And as always, we'd love it if you send in any feedback to our social media accounts. You can do that at CCC Omaha, or you can email us, podcast@cccomaha.org. We really, really do appreciate that.
Yeah, if you have a story to share about this, we'd love to hear it too.
Yeah, we'd share that. It's always good. Sharing stories helps people grow. All right. Thanks, everyone. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.